now formally welcome representatives from Community Voice Australia and Save the Bees. I understand information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you both. And for the record, could you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear today? We'll start with you, Ms Mason.
My name's Kate Mason and I'm a member of Community Voice Australia.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Simon Mulvaney and I run Save the Bees Australia.
Great, thanks to you both, and thank you, Ms Mason. I think you've sent through an opening statement for us that we have, but you do also have the opportunity to speak briefly to it if you'd like, and Mr Mulvaney, you'll have the same opportunity, so why don't we start with you, Ms Mason.
Okay, thank you. So we're focusing on Varroa Mite, the learnings from Varroa Mite, and we thank you for the opportunity to speak to the government and industry's bodies' management of Varroa Mite. We appreciate the opportunity to put on the record the many questions and concerns the community had, which were ignored and swept under the carpet by government officials. My submission today will outline issues regarding the biosecurity governance, decision-making structure, issues with transparency and accountability to the public, and the APVMA's relationship to chemical corporate entities, which we believe need to be grappled with prior to a fire ant biosecurity measures being implemented. From mid-2022 to September 2023, the New South Wales State Government, with industry partners, commenced on a bee killing spree. Later in 2022, they started putting fipronil in the environment. Healthy bees with no varroa were being killed within an endlessly spreading 10-kilometre red zone. By the time the DPI moved into a plan of management in September 2023, 40 million bees were killed across New South Wales. Crops were failing and an unknown number of beekeepers were put out of business, particularly the small end of town. There was a total of 600 fipronil bait stations deployed. At one time, there was a forecast of another 200. So potentially 800 fipronil bait stations deployed. We actually have no idea of how much fipronil is in the environment. CVA, Community Voice Australia, was aware of many beekeepers who were deeply traumatised by the DPI approach of coming onto their properties, pouring petrol in the beehives and taping them up to die. The trauma of the brutal measures, loss of employment, crops failing and lack of government transparency and accountability was damaging, to say the least. CVA tried extensively to get information from the government and their private partners regarding their plans. We were unsuccessful, and I am grateful that we have the opportunity to document this today. The fipronil poisoning was approved in October 2022 and the Australian pesticide regulatory body, the APVMA, approved the use of fipronil off-label, that is, not for its intended use. At the time, the Australian Native Bee Association stated feral European honeybees will collect toxic sugar syrup and take it back to their nests inside hollow trees. The fipronil may continue to remain toxic in these areas for up to 3 years. Unfortunately, native stingless bees and other nectar-feeding insects, reptiles, birds and mammals may visit these nests and collect contaminated honey, and they may die from fipronil poisoning. So Save the Bees Australia and Community Voice Australia started a petition asking for the halting and removal of the fipronil baiting and a judicial inquiry into the relationship between government, industry-funded lobby groups and organisations representing chemical company interests who have authority and sway over government policies related to bees. And this petition was tabled by AJP MP Emma Hurst in Parliament in August 2023. So why was fipronil used? A government report was previously commissioned in 2006 regarding the effectiveness of the use of fipronil for Varroa. The report, titled Asian Honeybee Remote Nest Treatment, findings were that fipronil would be ineffective and concerns were raised regarding fipronil impacting on off-target species. So why was this report ignored? Regarding APVMA capture, fipronil is a highly controversial chemical which has been banned in many countries around the world. It was approved to be used in the Varroa measures. In July 2023, under the direction of the Australian Government, Clayton Utz released a damning report detailing the APVMA's processes and procedures. Murray Watt stated that the matters identified by the review are very serious and point to systemic problems with the administration and governance of the APVMA. A particular concern in the report, it stated the APVMA's approach to regulation appears to align with industry interests. There are instances where the APVMA's level of engagement with industry stakeholders should be carefully examined, and a majority of the APVMA's ongoing chemical reviews have been in progress for nearly 2 decades. So the APVMA is predominantly funded by the industry it's tasked to regulate, and in our view this is a highly problematic model and fraught with high potential for corporate capture over a government body. Specifically regarding fipronil, the APVMA has been reviewing this since 2002. The Federal Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Senator Murray Watt, commissioned a further report into the APVMA, which was to be released on September the 30th, 2023. And this report was to include recommendations on the future governance structure and funding arrangements of the APVMA. Where is this report? Our multiple attempts to secure information on this report have been ignored. We tried very hard to communicate with government and private bodies starting back in March 2023, where we asked Plant Health Australia and the National Management Group for the assessment process for when they would transition to a management response phase. The answer was there was no transition to management plan. We asked for the risk assessment to ensure no harm would come to native bees and to ensure waterways were not impacted by fipronil. The response was that the traps were monitored, there was no acknowledgement and never has been that the contaminated honey would not stay in the traps. Again, with the state government, we wrote when it went to plan of management regarding the cleaning up of fipronil from the environment, where the bait stations had been, the overall use of fipronil, and what people should do if they see any injuries or deaths of off-target species near bait stations. We were ignored. We were never answered. We wrote to Murray Watts asking about the APVMA and asking for a review of it, a public review into this. He basically said there's no need, that the fipronil was in the bait stations and it was monitored, again not taking into account the fipronil going into the environment. So we found this over and over again. We still don't know if all the fipronil baits have been removed in New South Wales. The DPI will not respond in writing that they've removed them. That is still unclear. And in October 2023, the public learnt from an ABC article, Beekeepers Battling Varroa Mite Count the Cost of Failed Eradication, that Varroa had actually been in Australia for 1 to 1.5 years prior to mid-2022, when it was picked up in Newcastle. In that article, it's quoted the DPI director, Mr. Hansen. Unfortunately, this is his quote, "As it turned out with Newcastle, we now know it arrived 12 to 18 months before it became obvious and apparent to government and the industry parties that it was here. Those time lags really are an impediment to an effective eradication response." That's his quote. It's not appropriate that the ABC seems to be the only medium through which the public are told that the measures were never going to work in the first place and that the killing of their bees was pointless.
Ms. Mason,
Yep.
sorry to hold you up. A lot of your information is very useful,
Yep.
but I'm just
Yeah, I'm just finishing.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm
We'd
just
love to
finishing.
ask you questions too. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay, so basically we don't know when the DPI knew this, and we don't know why the scorched earth approach to Varroa continued after that point. Yes, so I'll just finish up with saying we are on the community. We are the people talking to beekeepers. We are the people that are actually trying to get information and transparency from government, and it was just completely obscure, to find out who was responsible, who we could hold responsible, where we could get a clear answer from was impossible, and people were incredibly distressed. And there were beekeepers talking to me about feeling suicidal and so distressed about what was happening with no answers and no accountability.
Thank you, Ms. Mason. Mr. Mulvaney, would you like to make an opening statement?
Kate did a great job there at summarising things. I'll be quite brief. Basically, in regards to what you're doing with the fire ants too, at some stage the beekeeping community was lost, and that had a lot to do with the double standards and the information coming out. It was, and I don't know if it's been confirmed, that Varroa was here for a lot longer, maybe a couple of years longer than what they made out. And the surveillance, as far as Varroa had gone to, they seemed to go on a killing spree before finding out how far Varroa had actually reached. They also saw a massive double standard where people who had stationary hives and residential beekeepers were getting their hives killed, when then they watched migratory beekeeping and pollination beekeepers be allowed to cross the border, and ended up taking Varroa to the almonds, which then could easily spread interstate. So beekeepers were lost there. The other thing, I rang several commercial beekeepers honey producers before coming today, and they all wanted to make clear that the imported honey could carry different viruses, and they were very concerned about that Varroa can be a vector for. And they are telling me that they won't be able to stay in the industry if we keep on getting this cheap imported honey coming in. And yeah, so another thing that they were trying to get through to me was there's a current protocol to alcohol wash your bees to test whether you got the mites or not, but that protocol in itself is very ineffective, and so I think. But two things I'm hearing is a lot of beekeepers are saying they're going to refuse to register their hives in the future, which is probably not good for anyone. And others are talking about getting out of the industry if they have to follow unreasonable protocols like the alcohol washes that aren't really working. And then I guess in general, if they're serious about stopping the spread of Varroa Mite, they've got to question whether they allow this migratory beekeeping to big pollination events like the almonds, because that's how Varroa is going to get spread. And in relation to fire ants, if you're going to make protocols, small ones for small businesses to be careful, you've got to do the same thing for the big businesses that potentially could be spreading the fire ants as well. But thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. We'll have a few questions, I'm sure. I might just kick off. And probably to Ms Mason, but either of you can respond. You mentioned that fipronil is banned in some other countries. Why is it banned, and what are the risks, I suppose, particularly to human health, if any, of the use of that chemical?
Simon, you're probably better to talk to.
Okay, either person.
Yeah, I think the reason it's banned overseas is predominantly for killing bees, because it's particularly well, every insecticide you get is broad spectrum, is going to kill everything. So if they're considering using fipronil for the ants, it's going to have devastating effect for beekeepers in general if it's a big area, and it's also going to kill, all the native insects as well.
Okay, so the issue is not human health.
Human health.
I sort of thought
there is toxicity in regards to for what I've read up on. They use them in egg farms, and that's one of the reasons they banned them overseas, because people have been poisoned.
So with the application of the baits that use fipronil in the response to red fire ants, do you have any evidence or particular concern about how the delivery of that bait can impact bee populations then, or other insects?
I've had people report to me that they lost their bees after the people came around to their house and informed them that their bees would not be affected. They lost their beehives.
This is after
the treatment.
After a baiting sort of...
After a baiting.
Yeah, treatment. Okay.
So it just stands to reason if the bees, they're not going to stay. They go to those bait stations. They take the sugar honey that's laced with fipronil. Then they take it into the bush. So then they have their nests in the bush, and then the fipronil is in that. So anything that comes past and eats that, or eats anything that's eaten that, ends up with fipronil poisoning. But there is no actual, doesn't seem to be, according to our questions, no one's keeping track of that. No, there's no, it's like the Native Bee Association says it stays active in the environment for 3 years.
Right, okay. You mentioned the APVMA assessment. I've had a look at their website too. They do seem to sort of have an ongoing consultation or assessment of fipronil. Are you involved in...
No, so that was 2002 it started, and there was, if you look back on the history through there, it actually started because there were, around the world, fipronil became of concern. So I think I have all this information so I can send it through to you, but they were looking at this because I think a government body, it might have been the state government at that time, or the federal government said, let's look into this. There's environmental impact concerns with fipronil. Now that is still ongoing from 2002. It hasn't been completed.
Yeah, I noticed that. That seems strange.
Well, that's the 20 years. It's the normal amount with the APVMA.
Right, okay.
And that's what was found in this Clayton Oots report last year.
I am looking, I noticed that one, and it does seem strange that it seems still in progress, even though it goes back, as you say, 20-odd years. But there's also another part. I'm not sure if it's a completely separate process, but there's a website here from the APVMA titled Fipronil Reconsideration, Residues and Trade, and apparently that consultation on that process closed on only the 18th of January last year, 2023, and I can't find anything else on it. But are you aware of that one particular?
I can't
might
speak
have predated your involvement.
Yeah, no, I can't speak to where that one is at the moment, but I have actually got a lot on record, so I can send you after this studies about the effects of fipronil.
All right, well, we'll certainly have questions for the APVMA at some point during this inquiry. We'll take it up with them. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I acknowledge your concerns about the APVMA. I've been working on that for some time now, especially in the last couple of years, and some of those bigger issues in the reviews. I think the Minister has said he will be releasing that review that you're seeking, Ms Mason, shortly. Question about fipronil. Through Plant Health Australia and Animal Health Australia, industry bodies provide levy funds that goes into research and of course, a response to an outbreak like Varroa. What was I'm presuming that the use of fipronil and the rollouts were pre-planned, like there was an emergency response already ready to go. Did you guys provide any kind of feedback prior to an outbreak that wasn't, you had concerns at that stage?
I wasn't even involved. I didn't become concerned until they started releasing fipronil into the environment and reading it in my local newspaper. Okay,
so you weren't aware that was part of a plan?
No, and they do have a report from 2006 commissioned, which the government commissioned it, which found that it wasn't going to work, and it was going to affect off-target species. So I don't know when that got put in the rubbish bin and this approach went on.
Okay. That might be something for us to look into, because I just figured they had a plan all ready to go, press the emergency button and roll it out.
I think that's why the amount of time Varroa had been here was important to release, and that surveillance, because I think it was well known in the beekeeping community, if anywhere gets hit, that they'll try to kill a certain circumference of bees off. But the fact that...
was there formal, just on that point though, Simon, was there formal consultation with you guys in terms of setting up a plan for the, I hate to say it, but the eventual arrival of Varroa Mite, like it's...
I don't know how they got it out to the public, but there was information out there in regards to... And there had been other Varroa incursions, and that was tried with the Asian bee in Cairns, and it wasn't successful. And they ended up saying that in that report, the fipronil wasn't the right chemical to use because of the damage it could do to the wider environment, and it wasn't going to be effective. And it wasn't effective because we still...
That was around the Cairns outbreak in particular. Okay, we'll look into that. On that point, though, do you have anything to add about the current outbreak?
Well,
and that's just been...
Well, we've had that the recent one in Brisbane, and I don't know if you've spoken to any other beekeepers, but it hasn't been released whether that Varroa was on a mellifera, on the European honeybee or the Asian honeybee. And it's going to have major ramifications if it was on the mellifera, the honeybee. But if it's on the Asian honeybee, it's less of a worry. So I'm not sure why they're not giving out that type of information.
So they haven't. I don't know. Yesterday, I'm sure I heard it was on the Asian honeybee.
There's no Asian honeybees in Brisbane, so that's why it's strange, because they're in Cairns. They haven't made their way down. So it was found in a European honeybees, sentinel hive. But it's going to be a big difference whether that's, from an Asian bee or not. But I don't know if it can deduce it was on the European honeybee if it was found in that surveillance.
Right. Okay, well, we can seek clarification on that. But obviously, I didn't get a chance to ask our earlier witnesses this morning about Senate recommendations following our initial inquiry into Varroa. But the number one recommendation was publicly release the details of how that outbreak occurred, which should get us back to the timing that you've raised this morning. If they actually know who was responsible, then we should actually find out how it happened. I mean, it's kind of feel like we're chasing our tail till we know that basic information.
Well, the DPI looked at it today and they're still talking as though it was just found in Newcastle in the middle of 2022.
Right.
So the fact that this only in an ABC article that it was here for 1 to 1.5 years prior, that needs to be scrutinised. Like, when did the DPI become aware of that? Because at that point, because all they did was go, okay, it's in Newcastle, let's do a 10-kilometre red zone. This 10-kilometre red zone is now, you know, if it was here for a year and a half earlier, it was game over.
Yeah.
So when did that get known?
Yeah. Well, we certainly would be very keen to get those answers ourselves. We've consistently asked estimates to the federal department too, and they've said yes, there is an investigation underway, and although they have said it's very complicated, and we may never know, I think was their response. But this morning we heard from our earlier witnesses that they understand that there will be some kind of information on that shortly. But yes, just be aware we are doing our best to try and to get access to that. Could I ask you the question, if not fipronil in terms of the response, given this is the first outbreak that we've had in the country, are you aware of anything else that could be used to eradicate? You know, assuming eradication was the option, and people believe that was worth a try, was there anything else that you could put to the committee that may have been used without fipronil?
In regards to Varroa Mite, to keep hives stationary is probably the key element of it. And I guess, you know, once you do that, you can contain it. So the fact that migratory beekeeping, you know, commenced a short time afterwards really gave all hope of the poisoning program being effective at all. But in regards of, you know, I think there's one example of an island where they eventually, all the bees died out because of Varroa.
Yeah.
And the deformed wing virus that came with it, and they no longer have it. But, that wasn't going to be possible.
Because it was put to us by the apiarists and some other groups, including the Honeybees Industry Council, that they felt like eradication was never feasible because of the wild honeybee population. But that was what was being targeted by the fipronil, correct? That wild population. Would there be any other way you could target that population without the use of fipronil?
No. You could never target the wild bee. You know, the wild bee population's endemic to here, and that's why the program wasn't going to work originally.
Right.
And in the original submission to Parliament, you know, that was one of the things that and then looking at the fire ants issue, you might have to question the same thing. You know, what's the point of a poisoning program if it's not going to be effective?
So if at that point that advice had been followed, that it's just not going to be possible for eradication because of those wild populations, that's the point to put a management response in place to stop the transfer of beehives and stop the fipronil baiting and move to what we're doing now, right? Like, is that, you just think that decision should have been made earlier?
They should have always had that available. What's the metrics to when you know this is out of control? And then that should be publicly available. If you're going to ask people to kill their bees, to go out of business, to have crop failure, to have this deep, distress, people have the right to know what's the metrics. Yeah.
I just remember asking questions at the time, and the other senators would probably remember this. The DPI, when we asked them in Newcastle, and the federal department communicated they were very confident that they could eradicate it, including the wild honeybee population. And maybe that's because we'd never done it before. I'm not making excuses for them, but that was just passing on what they did say to us at the time. There was an optimism that they could actually do that.
And that's what they said back to us when we wrote to them in March, in March 2023. But no country in the world's ever been able to eradicate it. So where's that confidence coming from? And, they have learnt to live with it, and I think it's a lot. I'm not a beekeeper, but it seems to be from what people, because I've been more, the permaculture people, the natural, it's a lot about building up the health of your bees and actually, there are natural plants and everything you can grow that help keep things in balance. So it's about balancing the ecosystem, not destroying the ecosystem through chemical use.
There should have been further surveillance before the killing was done. It seemed like there was a real lust to go in and kill hives immediately and an emergency in response to that. But they neglected the surveillance to how far the mite had gone,
Yeah.
and then still continued with the killing. So, yeah, that seems to be disappointing, and you might be able to learn something from that in regards to how this fire ants approach goes.
Okay. Chair, is Senator Colbeck on the line? Or is he back?
I don't think so. And just before, if Senator Colbeck is there, please speak up if you've got questions. I'm just checking the media's back in the room, making sure everyone's okay with that. If there are no objections, we'll continue. Did you have more questions, Senator Bush-Wilson?
Look, I think I can probably leave it at that for the moment, Chair. Look,
I'll just add one more thing, if that's possible.
I did have a question about, just quickly, very briefly, if you don't mind, Simon. Just so with the fipronil in this case with red fire ants, we understand it's being injected into the nest. My own personal experience with fipronil as a vineyard owner was in meat baits for European wasps. They were, it was licensed and used. I found it didn't work. I preferred to find the nests myself and manually destroy them. But I understand they're injecting it into the nests. Do you have any issues with the potential externalities of that?
That's a lot better than feeding it in honey or sugar syrup and out to the whole environment. And yeah, obviously I'm very concerned that the APVMA were meant to review this 20 years ago and are still commencing their review. And there's, more than half a dozen other countries that have banned it completely. So I do have concerns, but please hurry up and do that review. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's, definitely other issues there. Just in regards to Varroa, the one thing I was going to add is a lot of beekeepers are being asked now, or chemical treatments are becoming available. But it seems like it's hard at this stage that there's going to be natural methods of being allowed to use, and everyone, like beekeepers overseas, are informing me that there's lots of natural methods that they're using overseas that are very effective, and we just want to make sure that they become available as well to beekeepers, and they're not locked into using certain types of chemicals. Or that the chemicals are not mandated to beekeepers.
Just quickly, Chair, if you don't mind, I can put these questions to you on notice because we probably don't have time now, but I'm interested in whether your group, either of your groups, Kate and Simon, are involved in the National Bee Pest Surveillance Program or the National Bee Biosecurity Program. Currently under.
Every beekeeper is sort of required to test their bees. So, yeah, I'm sure that out of the 100,000 people that I've associated with Save the Bees, that a lot of them are doing that. And me personally, I'm choosing to test my bees by checking the drone brood. That is apparently a lot more effective than doing the alcohol washes.
Okay.
Can I just quick, sorry, just like less
Sure.
than a minute. I also think it's really important as a member of just the public and trying to understand who's responsible for what in a biosecurity measure it's untenable. So how if you want people in the community on board with biosecurity measures, there has to be somewhere, because you're right, and the government body or the private body will say, well, we're responsible for this tiny bit, get in touch over here, get in touch over there, and it becomes impossible to actually have any accountability and transparency regarding who makes what decision. And I actually think that's essential, that there needs to be one place where you can go to, and the people that work there are tasked with finding out who's responsible for what and actually representing the community's concerns within there, because the amount of people that were so distressed by what occurred is not okay, and it can't be repeated in further measures.
Okay, well, certainly hope that we learn from it. Could I ask in relation to pollination services, Simon, you briefly touched on this. Do you have any views on, or have you heard if there's any movement for the inclusion of pollination services under the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed Levy guidelines and legislation? So potentially it may be covered by future compensation
On that note, one of the guys that does do almond pollination contacted me and said that there is going to be a levy for them to have to pay through honey sales in regards to paying off the $100 million or so that was spent. Or over the years, and he said that looks like killing. He thinks that's unfair, and that will, hurt his ability to continue in business.
You know if that's a state-based levy or a federal?
I assume it's a federal.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because this guy was a Queensland beekeeper.
All right. Well, we can look into that. I must admit I'm not aware of that, Chair. Could I also ask in relation to a feasibility study for a commercial beehive traceability system? Are you aware of any developments in that area?
No, not aware not on that at all. But I do think this whole alcohol wash system, it's not effective. I know, I hate using the example like COVID testing, like alcohol testing is not like that. It only picks up like an 8% chance of whether you got Varroa or not. It's very good at picking up whether you've got a really bad infestation, but it doesn't pick up if you've got a small infestation of mites. So I need to have to test a small percentage of your hives, like 20 out of 1,000, isn't going to be very effective in regards to whether you've got the mite or not. But there is sticky strips and other things, and beekeepers are saying why they haven't been available in Queensland and other states. They're only available in New South Wales, but that would help people trace where the mites actually were. I think they're 90% effective.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I could put my other questions on notice. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Thank you both for your evidence. Very useful for us. I think some questions were taken on notice. We're asking for any information to be provided by the 12th of March to help us finalise our report. Thank you very much and have a great day. All right, I will welcome our